fact is, Democrats will never learn the lessons of their defeats because Democrats represent big business, they represent US imperialism, they don't represent us. We cannot let Bernie Sanders and AOC and the labor leadership that endorsed Kamala Harris lead working people back into the Democratic Party. We need to organize the 750,000 people who voted for Jill Stein and other working people around a fighting strategy and an organization fully independent of these two billionaire parties.
This is our first monthly meeting following the presidential election. And today we're going to be discussing next steps for building the anti-war, pro-worker movement independent of the two corporate parties. Kamala Harris and the Democratic Party have no one but themselves to blame for their massive defeat. They handed the victory to Trump, who left office after his first term as the most unpopular president in modern American history. Republicans have also gained control of the US Senate and are poised to do the same with the House. This is a consequence not of working people overwhelmingly supporting the reactionary policies of Trump and the Republicans, but rather a rejection of Harris and the Democratic Party promising to continue the intolerable status quo. And that status quo is imperialist war, genocide, and a collapsing living standard for working people. Harris made being not Trump her central selling point, calling him a fascist, all while adopting many of his reactionary policies, from demonizing immigrants and doubling down on the odious border wall to reversing her support to ban fracking. Ultimately, this election is a rejection of the Democrats more than it is a vote in favor of Trump. And working people cannot have illusions in a Trump presidency. We need a new party, an anti-war working class party. Shoma Sawant and Workers Strike Back attracted enormous ire from the Democratic Party apologists during the election for unambiguously saying that Harris deserved to lose this election. We stood unflinchingly against both parties of the billionaire class, and we reached thousands of voters in Michigan. In Dearborn, the American city with the highest density of Arab Americans, and where Workers Strike Back focused the bulk of our Get Out the Vote efforts, the Green Party vote jumped from 207 in 2020 to 7,600 in 2024. As we prepare to fight the next warmonger in chief as Donald Trump takes office, our movement needs to be crystal clear that the Democrats and even so-called progressives like AOC and Bernie Sanders, who cheerleaded Harris, are unfit to lead an effective fight. Today, we're first going to be hearing from M. Smith. M is an organizer with Workers Strike Back. She has years of experience union organizing and class struggle organizing, and most recently has been on the ground in Dearborn, Michigan with our Get Out the Vote campaign for Jill Stein. Please welcome M.
Hi, everyone. What we saw on Tuesday was a major loss for the Democratic Party. Trump won 312 electoral votes to Harris's 226, and for the second time, Democrats lost to someone who, when he left office, was the most unpopular president in modern US history. The Democrats, as Joan said, have nobody to blame but themselves for this loss. They sent billions of dollars to the Israeli military to fund the genocide. We've seen betrayal after betrayal going back decades, and we've just seen in real time the way that the Democrats paved the way for the right wing and have paved the way for Donald Trump. You can go back to the 1990s, the Clinton administration, how NAFTA and mass incarceration paved the way for George W. Bush, how Obama's bailing out of the banks instead of bailing out working people, the bailing out of the auto bosses instead of bailing out auto workers, betrayal after betrayal, broken promises, failure to fight on things like Roe v. Wade, the way that led to the Tea Party and led to the emergence of Donald Trump in the first place. Now we've seen the betrayals of Biden and Harris, their broken promises on the $15 an hour minimum wage, canceling student debt, the breaking of the railroad strike, the failure to fight back against the overturn of Roe v. Wade, the funding of the genocide. This has allowed Donald Trump back into the White House. Democrats have abandoned working people, and working people are correctly abandoning them. That doesn't mean that working people are moving to the right. You see this in the results of the ballot initiatives, including in Republican voting states. Voters in Alaska and Missouri voted to increase the minimum wage to $15 an hour. Both of those states voted for Trump. Voters approved paid sick leave in Alaska, Missouri, and Nebraska, all states that voted for Trump. Voters in Oregon approved a measure to protect marijuana workers' right to unionize. In Alaska, they voted to ban anti-union captive audience meetings, these union-busting meetings that are common across the country. Arizona voters rejected a measure that lowered the minimum wage for tip workers. This is the kind of attack on the minimum wage that Democrats just launched in Seattle that we fought back against. Arizona voters just rejected that sort of an attack. Massachusetts approved the right of rideshare workers to organize for collective bargaining. New Orleans voters approved a workers' bill of rights. Voters in Arizona, Colorado, Maryland, Missouri, Montana, Nevada, and New York approved measures granting a state a constitutional right to abortion. A similar ballot initiative got over 50% of the vote in Florida. It failed because of an undemocratic law that requires 60% of the vote to pass. The voters in Florida also approved a measure to protect abortion access. All of those ballot initiatives won. Working people want progressive solutions to the crises that are facing us, but they knew that Democrats wouldn't fight for them. That's why they didn't vote for Democrats. Working people want an alternative. The Democrats aren't fighting to raise the minimum wage. I mentioned the way that the Democrats have attacked the minimum wage here in Seattle and how our movement back in 2014 had to fight them tooth and nail every step of the way to fight to build our 15 Now movement and to win our historic $15 minimum wage victory, which has now brought, because we won that and because we successfully defended against the Democrats' attack a couple of months ago, and we need to stay vigilant and make sure that over the next month they don't try to bring a new attack in through the back door. But if that succeeds, if we can prevent that sort of attack, the minimum wage in Seattle in January will go up to nearly $21 an hour for every worker in Seattle. That will be the highest minimum wage of any major city in the country. These are big victories. The Democrats haven't fought for them. Socialists and union members and working people have. Trump's victory was overwhelmingly not a vote for Trump. It was a vote against Kamala Harris and the Democrats. In that context, we saw the Jill Stein campaign, right? A pro-worker, anti-war campaign, campaigning against the genocide, campaigning against these betrayals by the Democrats. Jill Stein currently has more than 700,000 votes around the country. Once all the votes are in, that's likely to be over 750,000. There's still votes to count in California and other places. So 750,000 vote for an anti-war, pro-worker alternative. This is the third biggest vote for a left anti-war, pro-worker party in recent history after the 2000 Nader campaign and the 2016 Jill Stein campaign. And in fact, I think these 750,000 votes, they actually represent a much stronger basis, a much stronger opposition to the two-party system, to the Democratic Party, than those past campaigns because of the onslaught of lesser evilism that we saw in this election. Those votes are a strong vote against the Democrats and the Republicans. In Dearborn, Michigan, I was down there for 2 weeks campaigning. Dearborn has a majority Muslim population. Jill Stein won more than 18% of the vote in Dearborn, Michigan. It was important that Abandon Harris publicly endorsed Jill Stein's campaign that was led by Arab American and Muslim American leaders in Michigan and Minnesota, around the country. It was important that they made a positive endorsement for Jill Stein. The role of Workers Strike Back on the ground in Dearborn was really the backbone of the Jill Stein campaign. We chose to focus our resources on Dearborn because of its importance, because of the anger in the Muslim and Arab community against the Democrats, against the funding of the genocide. A number of Workers Strike Back members, including Workers Strike Back co-founder Shama Sawant and the former city council member here, were on the ground for weeks at a time. You know, people came from Washington State, from Oregon, from Illinois, from Massachusetts, Missouri, Minnesota, came to Dearborn, Michigan to organize people around voting for Jill Stein, voting against the genocide, and building a new party for working people. We had a rally in Dearborn on October 6th with Jill Stein, Shama Sawant, and Abandon Harris. We campaigned on the ground. We set up tables in front of mosques, in front of grocery stores, in front of, on campuses and, near coffee shops, talking to thousands of people. And at the end of that campaign on election night, we saw the results in the precinct level results in Dearborn. In addition to the 18% of people who voted on the whole in Dearborn, we saw a huge vote for Jill Stein in East Dearborn, which is where the Muslim and Arab communities concentrated, and a major working class area as well. Jill Stein in those precincts beat Kamala Harris. Jill Stein beat Kamala Harris in 11 out of the 50 precincts in Dearborn. These are precincts that voted for Joe Biden with 60, 70, 80% of the vote in 2020. They abandoned Kamala Harris and voted for Jill Stein over Kamala Harris. And in 2 of those precincts, Jill Stein came within 30 votes of beating Donald Trump as well and coming in first. Now, already the Democrats are trying to pose as the resistance to Trump after losing to him twice because of their complete betrayals of working people. Already Democratic senators like Chris Murphy are talking about introducing a bill for Medicare for all. Where was the fight for Medicare for all while the Democrats were actually in power over the last 4 years? Now that Trump wins, you introduce a bill to fight for Medicare for all? Bernie Sanders put out a statement saying the Democrats have abandoned working people. I agree. So why did you full-throatedly endorse Kamala Harris? This was clear 2, 3, 5, 10 weeks ago. Why did you campaign for Joe Biden and then Kamala Harris and only wait until after the election to expose the Democrats' betrayals? Why did AOC blatantly lie to us and tell us that Harris was working tirelessly for a ceasefire? Now that the Democrats are out of power, they are going to try to rewrite history. They're going to try to dupe working people into believing that they're fighting for us, that Democrats are fighting for us, that they're leading the fight against Trump. We cannot let them rewrite history. We cannot let them drive our movements into yet another ditch. We already have Democratic Party leaders telling us that Democrats lost because they didn't go far right enough, that they didn't support the Israeli military enough, that they didn't cater to the right wing, people like Liz Cheney who campaigned alongside Kamala Harris, that Democrats talk too much about trans rights and other oppressed people. The fact is, Democrats will never learn the lessons of their defeats because Democrats represent big business, they represent US imperialism, they don't represent us. They also don't fight for women, they don't fight for trans people, they don't fight for black people, they don't fight for immigrants or any other oppressed group. The Democrats did nothing to fight against the overturn of Roe v. Wade, they did nothing to stop the right-wing attacks on trans youth, they smothered the Black Lives Matter movement with empty promises, dead-end committees, and then they increased police funding. As Shama Sawanta said, the Democratic Party is a graveyard for our movements. We cannot let Bernie Sanders and AOC and the labor leadership that endorsed Kamala Harris lead working people back into the Democratic Party. We need to organize the 750,000 people who voted for Jill Stein and other working people around a fighting strategy and an organization fully independent of these 2 billionaire parties. The vote in Dearborn is important. As I said earlier, 11 out of the 50 precincts, Jill Stein beat Kamala Harris. And those 2 precincts, there was less than a 30-vote margin between her and Donald Trump. We should look seriously at that, and we should look at what more could have been won. Unfortunately, we didn't see the Green Party put the same kinds of focus that Workers Strike Back did in Dearborn. This was a historic opening for the anti-war movement, and we should have brought all of our forces to the point of attack and gone after the Democrats in their weakest spot in Dearborn. The Stein campaign could have opened a campaign office there. They could have put staff on the ground. We could have had a massive door-knocking operation in East Dearborn in particular. If the Green Party had done that, Jill Stein could have won those precincts in Dearborn outright, and it's possible that we could have won Dearborn as a whole. That would have been truly historic. We need to learn those lessons for the future. We need to build on the momentum of those 750,000 votes. We need to build Workers Strike Back. We need to build on the fighting approach that we used in Dearborn. We said unapologetically, our aim is to defeat Kamala Harris for funding this genocide. We phone banked, we put up hundreds of posters, we set up tables outside of mosques, grocery stores, campuses, coffee shops. We signed people up to volunteer and to join Workers Strike Back. We flipped people who otherwise would have voted for Trump, for Harris, or not voted at all, by being honest with them that Jill Stein is not in a position to win the White House in this election, but that every vote for Jill Stein was a vote against the genocide and a step towards breaking from these 2 corporate, rotten, warmongering parties. And we fought for every single vote in Dearborn. That fighting approach is the same approach that won all of our victories in Seattle, the first in the nation $15 minimum wage in a major city, the Amazon tax for affordable housing, the first in the nation ban on winter evictions, the long list of renters' rights that we won, the second ceasefire resolution in the country after Dearborn. All of the other victories that we won were won with that fighting approach. We need to build on that, and we need to get the 750,000 people who voted for Jill Stein and millions of others organized around building a new working-class anti-war party. I want to talk about what kind of party we need, though. We're not in a position to launch a new party right away. We don't want just another third party. We want a party that is strong enough to take on both of these warmongering corporate parties. We need to be much stronger to do that, but we should talk right now about what a new party should look like. We've already seen the betrayals of other organizations on the left, which grew out of the first Bernie Sanders campaign. Organizations like the Democratic Socialists of America, which failed to stand up to Bernie and AOC. They failed to stand up to the union leadership. They failed to break from the Democratic Party. We saw my former organization, Socialist Alternative, and Shama's former organization give cover to the Democratic Party by attacking Shama and Workers Strike Back for campaigning for Jill Stein in Michigan. They were calling essentially for a safe states strategy. They said, vote for Jill Stein, but not if it hurts Kamala Harris, not if it hurts the Democrats. What would they have told the 18% of voters in Dearborn who voted for Jill Stein, the 200,000 Muslim voters in Michigan, many of whom correctly wanted to punish Kamala Harris for funding the genocide? That kind of approach leaves those people out to dry and pushes them into the arms of the right wing. We need a party that fully breaks from the Democratic and the Republican parties and doesn't give any room to that sort of lesser evilism. We also need a party that does more than run candidates in elections. As soon as someone takes office, and even before that, they come under enormous pressure from big business, from the political establishment, from all around them. We saw that for 10 years in Shama's socialist city council office. The only thing that stood up against that pressure in Seattle was an organization and a movement that was ready to fight. We need a political party that organizes in the streets and in workplaces, that organizes strikes and protests, that uses every tool at our disposal to win our demands. That means we need to organize union members in workplaces, to build a fighting labor movement, to throw out these union leaders who are tied to the Democratic Party, who gave their endorsement to Kamala Harris. We should remember this. We should remember what they did in endorsing Kamala Harris and endorsing this genocide, of telling working people that we had to fall behind this corporate party, including union leaders like Shawn Fain in the UAW, who called for a ceasefire, but then endorsed Harris. You cannot call for a ceasefire and then endorse the person funding the genocide. And Biden, you cannot endorse Biden and say that you support unions and then support a strike breaker who broke the railroad strike. We need to take a stand on these things. We need to throw out these union leaders who took these positions and build a new fighting leadership in the union movement. We need leaders who are accountable to the movement. We don't need leaders who get paid hundreds of thousands of dollars. We need leaders who take the average wage of a worker, like Shama did for 10 years on city council. Workers need the right to recall union leadership, to recall any leadership in a workers' party who sells us out or fails to fight for our demands. And we need to build our movement around concrete fighting demands. Workers Strike Back is fighting for a $25 an hour minimum wage, Medicare for all, taxing the rich to fund quality, affordable housing, good union jobs for all, ending the genocide, ending the occupation, ending US military aid to Israel, ending the wars, and fighting against every form of oppression, racism, sexism, xenophobia, transphobia, which Democrats have completely failed to do. We have a huge task in front of us, but we have a big opportunity. I hope everyone here will join Workers Strike Back for our February organizing conference on February 22nd at 10 a.m. You can sign up online at the Workers Strike Back website. I think we probably have signups here as well. Jill Stein will be there, along with Chris Hedges and other working people, union members from around the country, non-union members, working people from all over. I urge everybody to be there, and I also urge everybody here and anybody who might be watching online to sign up today to become a member of Workers Strike Back. Every single member is a step towards building the organization that we need. Every single member is a step towards building a new working class anti-war party that can win these demands, that can fight back and win against both the Democrats and the Republicans. So sign up for $25 a month or whatever you can afford. Help us build this movement to end the wars, fight Trump, fight the Democrats, and fight and win what working people need. I'm looking forward to the discussion and solidarity.
So I think after we're involved in a working class campaign, if it's an election campaign or another type of campaign, one of the key things that we have to do after it is assess what the strengths and weaknesses of it were, and also to plan out our next steps. And we want to, fundamentally, what we want to do most of all is carry forward the momentum from that campaign into our next struggles. And so I think, we've had a really good discussion. I agree with, the points that Em raised about the assessments of the campaign, the successes of the Jill Stein campaign, and some of the things that we, could have done differently. And I think in terms of the question of next steps, and this is the discussion I think we really need to have. We've already kind of put forward this idea of this February conference. We put forward the idea of a worker strike back convention next year. We also put forward the idea of protesting the inauguration. And we said actually before the election results that regardless of whether it was Trump or Harris in the White House, that we should protest the inauguration, and call for an end to all funding for Israel, call for an end to the genocide. And I think that is a next step. And I think other bigger forces are going to appear around inauguration protests, whether they're actually on the day of and they call them inauguration protests, or it's more like the Women's March, which is sort of an indirect inauguration protest. But as others have said, a key thing is the Democrats are going to try to step in again and paint themselves, in the context of Trump 2.0, they're going to be resistance 2.0. And we have to ourselves put forward an independent movement, in opposition to that, and also to actually point a way forward, because they're not going to point a way forward. If you remember, for those of you who were at the Women's March, the main message of the Women's March was vote blue, and vote blue harder. And that's what people have been told to do during this whole past period, and now Trump is back in power. But I think, we need to connect. We need to build movements out of this, and we have, I think, a lot of momentum to do that. And so we need to build a stronger anti-war movement, because the movement is not nearly strong enough right now to end funding to the war on Gaza. And we need to build a stronger workers' movement, because there's been steps forward in the workers' movement, including this latest strike at Boeing. But obviously right now the workers' movement is still relatively weak compared to what it was historically. And so we want to take every opportunity to build both of these things. So concrete next steps like the inauguration protest are very important. But also within this, we need to figure out, we need to have further discussion about this idea of running candidates. Because I think it's not just a question of running candidates, as others have said, it's a question of how we run those candidates. And I think that is a difference that we would have, Worker Strike Back would have with the Green Party, is that we don't think running lots of candidates is the best idea. We think we want to run candidates that are independent of the Democratic Party, and we agree with the Greens about that. We think we also want them to be based on movements. We want them to be linked to movements and accountable to movements. And we think that anyone being elected should then be using their elected office to build movements. And that's where we disagree with what's been done so far in terms of the Green Party elected offices, is they aren't using their elected office to build movements and to go up against the political establishment where they're in office. Because that's what we did, in Seattle, and that led to one explosive battle after the other. It also led to a lot of victories. And we think that's a critical thing. So the question of running candidates is linked to how they're going to run. Whether we support somebody running is whether they're going to run that way, or they're going to run on a clear working class platform, and they're going to fight for that working class platform if they're elected. And so we don't just want anybody to run. We want to build a movement that's strong enough to get behind a candidate who wants to use their campaign and their elected office in that way. And there are also other things we should ask, other questions we should ask about somebody running for office. Will they take the average worker's wage like Shema did? Because that's a good test of careerism. If you're having to accept $50,000 a year or $60,000 or whatever it is, wherever you would be running, versus $120,000 a year, some people are going to say straight up, well, that's not why I'm not interested in it. But also we need to keep people who do run, accountable to movements, and not making a six-figure salary is actually important in terms of if you're fighting for working class people and you're living on a working class salary, you're much closer to those working class people that you are running, that you're saying that you're going to fight for. But the most important thing, and I'll wrap up on this, is the platform itself. We need a clear working class platform, and the movement and Worker Strike Back has to be connected to that. That's a discussion between anybody who wants to run for office, and Worker Strike Back is the platform that they run on. Because at the end of the day, that platform is absolutely crucial. And then, bringing it forward in a confrontational way, not a nice way, but in a way to expose your opponents, running an offensive campaign that goes up against and antagonizes the ruling class. That is a crucial part of what we need in the candidates that we run. So we need to think long and hard about, picking a few campaigns that we run if we do run candidates. But most of all, what we want to do right now is build the movement.
We can't afford to let the momentum of Stein's presidential campaign end after November, but need to continue building towards our organizing conference in February to discuss next steps towards a new party for working people and the anti-war movement. And please join Workers Strike Back. Go to workerstrikeback.org and click on Become a Member. Solidarity.